Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Well, thank you so much, Sue, for joining the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're really grateful that we could finally arrange a time with you because we know you're super busy with all your wonderful work. Tradition on the podcast is we always ask our guests to introduce themselves to the audience because, no one could introduce you better than yourself. So it'd be really great if you could share a little bit about your professional background and also yourself as a human so our listeners could get to know you a little bit better.
Well, I think that's probably how I would describe myself as a human being. My background, I used to be a truck driver. I used to work in travel. And then for the last 20 years, I've had my own business focusing on the practical application of emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and neuroscience. So now I consider myself very fortunate that at least prior to COVID and now virtually, I get to travel all around the world, focusing on helping people be the best they can be. And I love that. I love what I get to do every day of synthesizing the science down to practical tools that we can use to flourish and thrive in our lives.
That's amazing. And I know that you're based in Byron Bay. And how does it feel to be in Byron Bay for listeners that haven't been there yet?
I love living here. I have to say, I just spent 4 days back in Sydney, and I love it. I love the fact that I've got the beach on my doorstep. It's peaceful, relaxing. I have koalas in my back garden almost. I love that I get the best of both worlds. I get to work with global clients from all around the world. I get to roll out of bed and sit around in my stretchy pants a lot of the time. And I probably work longer hours than I used to when I lived in Sydney, and yet it's a much more relaxed environment. So if you haven't been to this area, it's pretty special.
Yeah, definitely. I have been there, and I have to say that you're absolutely right. It's just such a great place to relax in. And that brings us to a really happy space to start the podcast. Thinking about Byron Bay, especially for us, we're based in Melbourne here in the studio. And, it's just nice to think about a place that is so relaxing. And I think to start with, we always want to start with the topic. Obviously, the podcast is about happiness, but in the particular context of your expertise area and what we want to talk about today is emotional intelligence. So we would love to get a definition from you about this topic before we go into the practice and all the details about the wonderful world of emotional intelligence. So, Sue, how would you define emotional intelligence?
Well, that's interesting. And I'd like to link it to your word about using the word happiness, because if you think about what emotional intelligence is, it's simply the intelligent use of emotions. That's all it is. It's about, we all have emotions. They come and go. They are there for a reason. It's how do we use those emotions intelligently? And if you think about happiness, often we use happiness to sort of be an overarching thing to do with well-being or flourishing in general. And yet when you think about happy is an emotion. It comes and it goes. I might give you a present and you feel happy about it. So that's just the emotional component. If we think about what we often describe as happiness, what we really mean is, am I flourishing in life? Do I have high levels of well-being? And I think for me, there's sort of two components that go very much hand in hand. So if you think about emotions and you being able to manage your emotions effectively, self-regulate when you need to, leverage your emotions when it helps you, that in turn will lead you to perhaps a more flourishing life. And even a piece of research out last week found that when you think about wisdom, so making wise decisions, emotional management in particular is so important for that, of being able to see somebody else's perspective, manage your own emotions rather than getting carried away with them in order to make effective choices. So for me, emotional intelligence is simply the intelligent use of emotions.
Mm. That is very interesting how simple it is, right? It doesn't sound that complicated, but when you unpacked it, my brain was kind of going in 10 different directions because, yeah, obviously we have a lot of emotions as humans, and happiness is, like you said, one of those. So today, the context is actually happiness, and we'll definitely go into the details in a little bit. But the first activity that we want to do with Sue today is to get to know you a little bit better and get some recommendations from you as well, because I'm sure you have a lot of interesting things to share with listener, and it is a nice way to know what you enjoy, and some of the fun things that have been happening perhaps in your life.
Mhm.
So this is called rapid fire. And we have 10 things we want to ask you to give us a name for. It could be a recommendation that you got from a friend, or it could be something that you really like.
Mhm.
So, are you ready?
Okay, ready.
Awesome. Okay, so the first thing that we want to know is a book recommendation from you.
Well, it's interesting because when you say the first thing that comes to mind when I see the word book, it's curiosity and education. And it's also the stack that's beside my bed. So for me, when you say the word book, probably one of my favorites is Social by Matt Lieberman. He's a social neuroscientist. But really, for me, books are about how do I gather information? How do I build my curiosity? And I
Mm.
try and read a range of things. So yeah, I don't know why, but Social, Matt Lieberman, that's always one of my favorites that come to mind. Although I've got about six on my beside my bed right now that I'm in the middle of.
That's great. Yeah, I think we should all aim to be more curious when reading, because it's easy to just read something that's easy to digest and you forget about it. But I feel like when you have that curiosity with you and read to absorb new information, it's just great for lifelong learning because you're constantly taking in new information. So that's really great. That sounds like an interesting read as well, because I am interested in that particular area too. So I'll definitely check it out, and
It's a good one.
listeners might do that as well if they are interested. So thank you for the recommendation. The next thing we want to ask you is a movie that comes to your mind.
For me, movies that take your brain out. So anything that takes my brain out, usually with I don't know, car chases, bullets, shoot 'em up, that sort of thing. For me, movies are specifically about how do I take my brain out. So I'm not necessarily going to recommend one, but I use movies as an escapism, if you
Mm,
like.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So what is the most recent movie that helped you with helped you escape reality, perhaps?
Well, interestingly, the most recent movie I watched, it was during the floods here, and I didn't really want to go and see it. It felt frivolous to go to the movies because
Yep.
everybody had lost their homes, etc.
Yep.
But our tickets were booked, so David and I went along reluctantly, and we went to see Belfast.
Mm,
And for somebody from an emotional perspective who scores quite high on what they call sensations, which is feeling what other people feel, I found it really confronting. It wasn't necessarily take your brain out, sort of my usual action, shoot 'em up type movie.
yeah.
But it was quite confronting knowing that people had that hatred in them for a person that lived next door and everything that went on in Northern Ireland. And I guess it reminded me that that hasn't ended if we look at the Ukraine war that's going on. Um, yeah, I don't like to think that people can hate another human being that much. I don't understand it. I really struggle with that. So
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't a take your brain out. It was a reminder that there's a lot more work for me to do.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it's definitely not the usual take your brain out kind of
No.
things, but it's a great reminder nonetheless, right? So, yeah,
Absolutely.
another form of education. And yeah, I feel like when we are, when we're emotionally ready for it, we'll definitely have to watch that movie. It sounds really interesting.
It's a good one.
Yeah. How about a podcast that comes to your mind?
Coffee break Italian, because again, from a neuroscience perspective, I know people who speak multiple languages. It's good for our brain. So I have been learning over the last nearly year. I've been learning Italian using my Coffee Break Italian podcast, and I love
Ah, hey, that is
it.
great. What a nice way to learn a new language. So,
It's great.
whichever language we pick up, hopefully we can find a similar podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. How about a documentary?
I don't ever watch documentaries. Like I say, I kind of don't watch too much TV or movies, but when I do, it's usually take your brain out type ones. I
Yeah.
do want to watch the new one with Chris Hemsworth, Limitless, but I haven't seen it yet.
Ah, okay. Chris Hemsworth. That is
Well,
interesting.
it's about health and longevity and,
Yeah.
science and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
because I know that he has this workout app, so that's probably linked to, like the human body and potential of what we can do, I guess. So
yeah, he
that
spent
would
a
be
year
interesting.
apparently, investigating ways to live as healthy as possible, as long as possible, and it's
Mm.
out soon. Maybe it's already out, I don't know, but that's
Yeah.
probably the next one I'm going to watch.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for that. I'm also keen to watch that if it's already out or when it is out. Who would be your famous role model then?
Again, Lou, I don't have role models as such. I've got nobody I want to be like apart from me, because I don't understand why anybody wants to be like anybody else.
Yeah.
So for me, my role model is the best version of me. How do I show up as the best version of me more frequently?
Yeah.
But I suppose somebody who got me started in this area was a gentleman that nobody will have heard of, I'm sure, called Lou Tice. And he was, even when I knew him, he was like a granddad in cardigans, but he knew an awful lot about personal development and flourishing. So, yeah, he's probably somebody who got me started.
Yeah.
But for me, a role model is, your role model should be the best version of you and becoming that more frequently. My role model should be the best version of me, and how do I
Yeah.
become that more frequently?
Yeah, I love that idea. Thank you. We should all aspire to do that because a lot of the time we just forget that, we're here. We could be the best
Yeah,
version of ourselves and, that's where we should be.
yeah. Why do you want to be somebody else when you're you?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think I've heard that before. So, yeah, definitely a great reminder to myself and definitely to our audience too. All right. So, next one we want to ask is an app that comes to your mind.
I really love the Mood Meter app. It's been around a while. It was developed out of the original emotional intelligence model, and it's just called Mood Meter. And we use it all the time in our diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. We get people to do an assessment around measuring their mood using the Mood Meter app for a couple of weeks and identifying the emotions. And the reason I love it is because it helps build your emotional vocabulary. And we know building our emotional vocabulary actually builds your ability to perceive, understand, and manage emotions. So it's a great tool, and it can sort of measure where your well-being is. And as I say, it helps build your emotional vocabulary as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I will have to try the app. I wonder which mood I'm in and I'm going to measure it today. That'd be great. How about a news website?
I don't watch the news.
Same.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm actually just on the same boat. I got asked this question, and then all I could think of was maybe Apple News because it's just on my phone and it's
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so not really a fan of the news. All right, this will probably be more fun. An artist that comes to your mind.
The first one that comes to my mind is actually Ellen Langer, and again, she's not going to be a famous artist for most people, but she's a very famous a person in the positive psychology space. So she sort of started working in the whole positive psychology and wellbeing space probably before most people did, before it became sort of famous. And she's also an artist on the side. So she
Oh,
probably comes to mind because I admire her work as a researcher, and I teach her work all the time, and it informs my mindset. So she's the first one in my head.
yeah. Well, which kind of art does she pursue, if I may ask?
Not being massive artist person, it's usually got little white dogs on it in some form of sitting on stools or washing up at
Yeah.
sinks and stuff.
Oh,
I
are they
certainly
paintings?
Yeah, paintings. I wouldn't put them on my wall as much as I love Ellen Langer. I'm not really a fan of her art. Um, but you asked who comes to mind.
Yeah,
She's the
yeah,
one
yeah,
that comes to
absolutely, absolutely. I was just wondering because, she's a researcher and she does art. So I was like, "Oh, what kind of art does she do?"
mind.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right. How about a course that you have completed?
Oh, I've completed so many courses. One of my
I bet.
strengths is curiosity and love of learning. When I'm in the, so I've just completed series 2 of Coffee Break Italian. So that's been really good, the intermediate level. And I am also just started a good colleague, friend of mine, Mike Steger, who focuses on research around meaning. He's just released a meaning and purpose course. So I've deliberately signed up that and I've watched the introduction. So that's one of my next things. And he said to me, "You probably won't learn anything you don't already know." And I'm like, "It's not the point. You do great work and I'm supporting it." So I'm curious to see what new and exciting things might be in there.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a wonderful course. How about an event that you have attended? Given all that's happening, I reckon it's probably a long distance event or maybe even a virtual event.
Well, I was down in Sydney this week for an event. So
Oh,
it's Happiness and Its Causes. So Happiness and Its Causes is on in Sydney every year. I think I've spoken at it every year for the last maybe 8 or 9, perhaps. So I was speaking. I did a keynote on the first day, and I got to spend some time there, and it was really lovely because so many of our beautiful diploma students were there. So some of them I hadn't met because we'd only done virtual sessions. So I really love that event. They get a range of speakers, and obviously this year, to your point, they had some virtually from international speakers and some in person. So that was really good.
yeah. How does it feel to be back at, in-person events?
Yeah, look, it's nice. I'm not a big social type person, so
Yeah.
I actually really like the virtual. Um, but it is nice. I mean, being on stage and doing your thing and connecting with people, and I do like to hug people, so that's always quite nice. The people that are ready for hugs.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, I'm a bit of a hugger at events too. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from for sure. It's so wonderful to hear, and it feels like life's happening again. So that's really great. And thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing about the 10 things that we asked. It was a fun way to get to know you. And also, I got a bunch of recommendations from you that I'll have to definitely check them out.
Cool.
Yeah. Great. So now we are going to jump into the next bit, which is all about practice and habit. Because, we are going to talk about emotional intelligence in the context of happiness today. But we also want to start by something realistic first. We want to know what would be a practice that you do to cultivate your emotional intelligence.
Look, to be honest, there's many things that I do to cultivate it, and it all comes from knowing the science. So, if you think about one of the first steps of emotional intelligence, it's about perceiving emotions in self and others, because you've got to actually be aware of it in the first place. So, one of the things that I practice for myself is really tapping into my physiology of noticing how I feel, notice how I'm sitting, noticing what's going on in my face, and really paying attention so that I can get that information about what emotions I'm experiencing first. And when it comes to other people, even virtually, I always ask people, please pop your camera on if you're able to, etc., because you actually have an area of your brain that's designed for reading faces. So even if you're virtual, if you've got your camera on, it's like, oh yes, oh I can see, and you can see those little
Yeah.
things go across people's faces. So I think that's one of the things is really try and the way I describe it is imagine an Excel spreadsheet with financial data on it. If your financial data is inaccurate, you will make some poor choices about what to do with your money. If your financial data is accurate, you can make more effective choices about what to do with your money. It's exactly the same with emotional data. If you get the data correct in the first place, you can make better choices of what to do with it. So, my first practice is how do I really try and pay attention to my own emotions and others, because then I know I can make a better choice of what to do with it. So, that's one thing that I practice. Another one that I really practice is trying to make sure I've got good habits for my well-being so it's easier to regulate my emotions. So when I notice how I feel, I can then do something with it, if you like.
Yep.
And I have a range of strategies and tools in my toolkit that I employ every single day to ensure that when emotions come up, as they do, they come and they go, that I've got tools in my toolkit to sort of appropriately deal with that data as it appears.
Yeah, I think that that is definitely a great point that we'll definitely explore a bit more when we talk about the research, the theory, and the work that you do. But in the context of the practice that you mentioned, I find it to be interesting how you compare it to like the financial spreadsheet. I think we can explore that a bit more here because you said that when you understand the emotions correctly, then you can proceed, and I feel like that is probably something that's not tangible to a lot of people because again, we're talking about emotional intelligence. Each person's level of emotional intelligence would be different, so the way that we could understand emotions from other people as well as ourselves would be a bit challenging. So you said that you try to understand it. So what would be like the little tip then when you try to understand or identify emotions from other people or maybe even within yourself?
Hmm. So, this is the thing to your point. Most of the time, people don't know that emotions have a science behind them. And just like you could get better at tennis if you learned more about tennis, you could get better at maths if you learn more about maths, you can get better at emotions if you learn more about emotions. So, for me personally, if I think about people's faces, your face will give you away from an
Yep.
emotional perspective. You will have little micro expressions and involuntary movements on your face. Well, if I learn what they are when I see them, then I can then make a decision of, well, what do I do with that information?
Yep.
So if you and I are in a meeting together and I think I've seen a look of anger across your face, I then have a choice of, do I wade in and I go, oh, you look angry, tell me? Possibly not. But
Yep.
I might check in with you afterwards. How are you feeling? What's going on?
Yep.
Same as within myself. If I know that when I feel anxious, my heart races, my breathing gets shallow, and I get sweaty palms, then awesome, brilliant. That's telling me that I'm anxious. That's giving me data. It's giving me information. And if you think about what emotions are, that's all they are. They're data, they're information. They're trying to tell me something.
Mm.
So once I've got that information in, again, from a scientific perspective, there are rules behind it. So if I see a look of anger across your face, I know the rule behind anger is you are feeling blocked from something you value or something is getting in your way.
Mm.
So if I want to understand why you're feeling angry, I can think about, okay, well, what's going on for you? What's getting in your way, etc. If I notice someone is feeling sad, the rule behind sadness is loss of something of value. Well, I don't know what that loss is, and I don't necessarily need to, but I know you are feeling. It could be a loss of your team companionship because you're working from home. It could be a loss because somebody close to you has passed away. It could be a loss because you've lost your favorite pen and you can't find it, you know. It could be a whole range of different things. But
Yep.
I suppose for me, it's about when you understand the science, it makes it so much easier to deal with it and you can move on much more quickly. And I
Yep.
suppose what I'm consistently surprised by, and I feel part of my job is we don't get taught this. You know, maybe when you're a little kid, you get shown a smiley face, an angry face, and a sad face, and you get taught some words, but we don't get taught these sorts of things. And often, you know, you go through university or you get into your first role or whatever it happens to be, and you learn all the technical things to become an engineer or a doctor or this, that, and the other, but nobody teaches you how to connect with people on an emotional level and how to manage your own emotions. We kind of assume people pick it up from their parents or the people around them, but
Yep.
often we don't.
Yeah, that is so true. I feel like in the context of this particular practice that you're sharing with us, for listeners, it's probably a bit more challenging to pick up because you already have the tools. You're the researcher, you're the expert. But if I were to kind of translate this to the everyday person, I would probably say it's a practice of learning more about the different emotions and having that understanding. Because as you said, we don't get taught this at university or in school or any classes for that matter, at least not as so far as we can see. That's not really a thing.
Yeah.
So I would say for us it's definitely the act of learning would be a good
Mhm.
practice. So what would you say to be some of the benefits when we start to learn, start to notice, and start to really analyze and take in this information about different kinds of emotions?
Yeah. Well, let me give you a real life example. And I'm going to speak from my personal perspective, but there may be other, probably more females on who are listening to this that would may link. If you've ever been in a situation where you've been feeling really angry at work and you end up crying,
Mm.
So I know a previous boss years ago back in the UK, I used to find myself getting so frustrated, but she was my boss, so I couldn't yell at her. But I'd find when I got angry, I teared up. And then I used to get really angry at myself for tearing up in front of this woman. And then I used to get really frustrated, and then I'd get even more angry, etc. So looking at what we know now from the science, and this is how I worked it, is your body is trying to tell you something. So what did I do? And this is what I teach people all the time, is before the tears. So when you notice the tears, see if you can identify what's happened just before it. And then what was going on in your body just before that, and then just before that, and then just before that. Because what will happen, there will be a cascade of data, of information that's trying to get through to you. And often what we notice is the tears at the end. We don't notice the fact that our throat's constricted, or our breathing has changed, or we've started to get warmer. So if we can sort of back it up, and this is what I say to people to practice, tap into when you feel happy, stop and notice what's going on in your body. When you feel calm, stop and notice what's happening. When you feel anxious, and what you do is you notice all those little signals. So when it happens again, you go, haha, I'm on the anger scale of 3 out of 10. Oh, let me just stop here before I get to an 8 out of 10 on the anger scale.
Yeah.
So tapping into that, and to your point, just you don't have to spend ages at it. This is not like analyzing and laying on a psychologist's couch for days. This is just about stopping in the moment and going, oh, that's really interesting, I've got sweaty palms, or that's really interesting, my temperature's just gone up, or that's really interesting, I feel like moving. What's going on here? What's happening? And
Yeah.
I think if you can spend a bit of time doing that, what it means is you're getting better data on your spreadsheet, if you like, so that you can make better choices of, in a meeting, do I keep my mouth shut because actually I've got to a 7 out of 10 on the anger scale, and what I'm about to say is not going to be a good idea? Or I've noticed that I'm feeling anxious, so I sit on my hands, I breathe, I smile, and I bring myself back down. So it's really just sort of tapping into the data so we can
Yeah.
use that data to help us.
Mm. Yeah.
And it takes
That's
practice.
interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is why this is a practice section. We're talking about the practice itself. So I think with emotions, it's a bit hard. It's not like you can plan for your emotions. Like as far as I know, we don't really have that ability yet as humans. And I find that if at one point we ever do have that, that'll be a bit strange. But because of the nature of emotions and the gathering data acts, you probably do that on a really frequent basis. But then the reacting part, that's a bit harder to kind of explain when and how to do it. So when we talk about this practice and the practices that you want to combine them with, how often should we do this? For anyone who wants to improve on their emotional
Mm.
intelligence.
So it's a really good question. And to your point, we can't necessarily control our emotions. Sometimes something happens in front of you and you just have a response.
Yeah.
You're in a meeting and somebody says something and you want to slap them or whatever it happens to be. So we will have those emotions. To your point, the way that I often think of flourishing, if you like, so when we
Yeah.
have high levels of well-being, it's, do I have tools in my toolkit to increase the duration and intensity of my ups, my more positive emotions? And do I have tools in my toolkit to reduce the duration and intensity of my downs?
Mm.
So if we think about what that looks like, I have probably about 30 different things that I would do every single day that I know boost my positive emotions. So
Yeah.
there'll be little things like I get up in the morning and I have my warm lemon water. I have my green drink. I go for my walk. I have a few minutes with my husband. I have a 15-minute cut off time on my social media because I know spending too much time on social media is not good for you. I have little things at night where I write down the 3 things I'm grateful for today and I reflect on them. I have moments of savoring when I savor the sparkly lights that are in my bedroom before I go to bed, or the carpet under my feet. So there's little things that I do every day that I know do boost my positive emotions. And I'm not saying I control them necessarily, but I have things in place to go, okay, I want more of these. How do I get more of these?
Mm.
So I think that's something you absolutely can look after. And then to your point is, something happens and you experience sadness or grief because someone you love passes away. You can't control that grief, and we shouldn't control that grief. It's wonderful to sit with that. And I have a saying about these sort of emotions, which is get comfortable with the uncomfortable emotions. And sometimes when we feel sad, it's really useful to sit in it for a little while and just notice and enjoy your grief if you like. Sometimes it's important to feel anxious. That's telling you something. It's telling you you're feeling physically or psychologically threatened. Well, that's useful to just understand what's going on for you. So I think what's really useful is allowing yourself to sit with the discomfort and then going, right, how long do I want to stay here? And what tools have I got to manage this emotion, to handle it? So, whilst we can't control those emotions sometimes, they do just appear. We can put strategies in place to shift them, to move them quite quickly if we've learnt them. But to your point, I do just want to add this. People often say to me, oh, it's all very well, talking about it when you're out of the moment, but what about when you're in the moment?
Mm.
Well, the important thing there is if you don't practice out of the moment, you won't have those tools at your disposal when you're in the moment. So we
Yeah.
need to practice. We need to have these things in our toolkit ready and available to us.
Yeah. Would you say this is something that you practice on the daily, or, you set aside time?
Look, I absolutely practice it daily. And for me, because I've been in this space for a long time, and I'm not
Yeah.
saying I always get it right, I definitely don't. But I find that now it's become habitual.
Yeah.
So I had a loss in my family about a year and a half ago. And I was devastated. I just couldn't stop crying. I was just feeling like, oh my goodness, this is just terrible. And and I did. I experienced that grief, and then I went through a series of things. So I wrote in my journal, which is one of my go-to strategies. I wrote in my journal. I started writing about how amazing the person that I lost was, and what they meant to me, and how grateful I was to have them in my life. I deliberately sort out some pictures, and because we couldn't have anything formal, we created our own little memorial moment. And then I did a mindfulness on honoring grief, and then I was kind of done. And I literally like, okay, I'm sorted. And I remember my sister I'd spoken to while I was in my oh my god, this is so terrible moment. She rang me the couple of days later, and she said, "Oh, how are you feeling? How are you feeling?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good actually. I was kind of good at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon." And she went, "How do you get past things so quickly?" And it's like, it's because I have the tools in my toolkit and I use them. So I literally employed one thing after another, that whilst I still think of the loss now and again, I'm absolutely 100% over the grief that I felt at the time. So I don't know if that helps, but it's about you it's become habitual to me now. They're easy for me now because I've practiced them so frequently.
Yeah.
And I've used what I know about the science to help me. So from a habit perspective, we know there's some great tools to help you build a habit. So I've done things like stuck the word smile on the ceiling above my bed. So when I wake up in the morning, I put a big smile on my face to start my day. I had that sitting there for 3 months until it became a habit, and then I took it down.
Oh,
Um, so,
nice.
you do things to make things habitual. And once you get them habitual, it helps you get past things much more quickly.
Yeah. I think that is such a great strategy. And I feel like for each person, it might look a bit different because,
Absolutely.
like learning about emotional intelligence and equipping ourselves with the tools. Like you said, you're an expert in the area. You've been researching and you've done this for a while. You have the toolkit. But I bet you a lot of us, we actually don't have the toolkits because, we don't get taught this. Maybe we're not actively seeking for a way to learn about it. So I think just getting that reminders that you can actually gather
Mm.
the data at it comes and actually practice noticing what's happening and maybe analyzing it a bit. I feel like that is a good start, especially for anyone who's so new to the space and kind of feel confused when it comes to other people's emotions or even their own emotions for that
Yeah.
matter. So
And
yeah.
to your point, what's really interesting is many people, we do know this, as in we know it when we stop and think about it. The
Yeah.
difference is we don't practice it. We want to win the lottery because then we'll be happy. Well, I should warn your listeners that the lottery actually doesn't tend to make people happy most of the time, for a little bit, but not for a long period of time. We
Yeah.
wait for something external sometimes to make us happy. And the funny thing is, and I did a session this morning with some clients, and I said to them, I said, if you had 2 minutes to do something that generates positive emotion, what would you do? Well, they all know what to do. I'd go and hug my son. I'd go and play with my cat or my dog. I'd go and make a cup of tea and really savor the moment. Fantastic. You all know what to do.
Yep.
The difference is sometimes we don't do it. And if you look at what the research tells us around emotional intelligence, which I think is quite lovely, is if you give 100 people emotional and social problems to solve, and you do it while they're under a scanner, so their brain is being scanned, what you'll find is everybody will get to the correct answer eventually. But those higher in emotional intelligence will get there faster.
Mm.
Now, I think that's really cool because let's imagine your partner says something that annoys you and you're already in a stressed out mood. They say something, you snap back. 2 hours later, you're still arguing about who left the top off the toothpaste. They storm out or you storm out. And then the following morning, you go, I really should have done this. Well, you know what you should have done. The idea is if we can practice this stuff, we get there faster. So we
Yep.
don't destroy the afternoon or the evening on having an argument. We go, I'm already irritated. They're probably stressed. We're going to snap at each other. We're probably not in the best mood. Let's just take a moment. Let's just go for a walk, get out, do what we need to do, or let's just give each other some space and deal with our own emotions. And the funny thing is, everybody knows that after the event, what we want to do is speed it up so we know it
Yep.
before we've stuffed up our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such an interesting way to look at that. Yeah, I feel like yeah, definitely we need to really understand and unpack our emotions much better and process it faster. So situations like what you just mentioned won't happen. It affects, all different areas of our lives. Um and yeah, I feel like when you said you have been practicing it on the daily, and I feel like we can do that too, like even if we're not researchers, we are able to look at different areas that we could improve on based on the emotions that we've observed from other people, even like you said, and in ourselves too. So in the context of happiness, this is a really great practice. It's quite complex, but in the context of happiness, how would you say this to affect your level of happiness in general?
Yeah. So again, if I think of happiness, there's the emotion of happiness, and then there's the more holistic view that we mentioned before. That's more around that overall well-being.
Yeah.
So if we think about overall well-being view of happiness, that's when we're thinking about, do I experience on average more positive emotions in my day than negative emotions? So if you
Yeah.
actually look at the research around happiness, Ed Diener, who was often known as Dr. Happiness, he was one of the most prolific researchers in this space. And he basically sort of indicated that our overall well-being, our overall subjective well-being is based on, do I have more positive emotion than negative emotion on a daily basis? And am I satisfied with my life? So if you think about that, it automatically gives us a few tips. As in, okay, so, and again, future research or ongoing research from that has indicated this rough ratio that people who say they're flourishing have 3 times more positive emotion than negative emotion when you average it out. So that's brilliant. So it's basically, what are you doing on a daily basis to leverage some positive emotion? What little things do you do? And I have very practical, and we run a membership forum called Learn with Sue. So anyone can become a member, and it's all about how do we make the science practical in this space. And we have guests, and we also discuss certain things.
Yep.
But at the beginning of this year, we all I challenged the members to do a to-do list. Now, some of them know about this anyway, because we've taught them in other sessions. But a to-do list is where you jot down maybe 12 to 15 things that you know boost your positive emotions. They boost your well-being.
Yep.
And they're little things. And then the idea is that you tick off a certain number per day. So I challenged my members to do 10 for 10. So 10 things for 10 days. So you might have 12 or 15 things on your list, and you need to tick off 10 per day. Now that's quite, sometimes quite a stretch. But the idea is they're little things that prioritize positivity in your life. Because most people listening, myself included, you will have a to-do list. You will have a list of things you've got to do, of calls you've got to make, proposals you've got to write, people you've got to call back, podcasts you've got to create, whatever it happens to be. You've got a list of things to do. A to-do list is little activities that prioritize positivity in your life. So if I give you an example of not just mine, but many others that I've seen, things like mine is 15 minutes of Italian, 10 squats, 10 push-ups, 15 minutes on my Shakti mat, 15 minutes of reading a fiction book, 15 minutes of reading fact, 15 minutes of reading research. Some others I know are 15 minutes playing with my dog. They could be 15 minutes of tidying. They could be, I don't know, I'm just trying to think. I've got 15 minutes of doing jigsaw puzzles on mine. So
Yeah.
they're little things that boost your well-being. And this is saying, how do we prioritize them? But they're not like what's on a to-do list, which is more about chores,
Mm.
things I've got to get through. And the idea of this is it's a way of prioritizing positivity. And if you think about it, that makes complete sense because the research tells us that people who prioritize positivity in their lives have higher levels of well-being.
Yeah.
And when I say that, people are like, well, duh. Well, of course it makes sense. Of course it makes sense. But how many people do it? I can guarantee most people listening have a to-do list. And on that to-do list is not things that prioritize positivity. It's
Yeah.
stuff you have to get done.
Yeah.
So a to-do list is going, okay, well, let's do this. And we had such fun with the members on Langley Sue because we all came back the next month and it's like, yeah, this really worked for me. And I've got it on a little laminate next to my bed. So I tick them off. Or somebody else is like, I've got them on my fridge. And every time I walk past, rather than eating stuff, I tick something off.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of building it to your point of not just the practices, but making it habitual, I suppose. And I love it. I've just got back, as I say, from Sydney. And I've already got my little to-do lists printed out on little cards ready to go
Yeah.
from today so that I'm doing another 10 things for 10 days to boost my positivity.
Ah, that's great. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, in the context of emotional intelligence, it's just uh, towards happiness. You just have to nurture more positive emotions.
Absolutely.
And how do you do that? You have to understand first, how you get there. So I think it's everything ties in really nicely together, and I feel like we all know this, like you said. It's not like we don't know this as humans. We know that we want to be more positive and we want to cultivate more habits that bring positivity into our lives, but sometimes we just don't know how.
Yeah,
So,
and to your point, just on
yeah.
that emotional component, sometimes people think happiness is about woohoo, rah, rah, joy, joy, happy, happy, yay, and I've got to pretend.
Yeah.
If you look at positive emotions in general, there are so many. So you might have things like serenity and peace that you might culture moments of that.
Yeah.
You might culture moments of gratitude and appreciation. You might cultivate moments of interest and curiosity, or hope and optimism, or inspiration, or awe, or amusement, or pride.
Yeah.
These are all beautiful, positive emotions. So they don't all have to be what makes me happy. And unfortunately, that can get us in trouble because we think the next handbag, or the next car, or the next TV, or the next thing will make us happy. But sometimes it's the moment of, when I'm down the beach and I see a nudibranch. If you've never seen a nudibranch, just look at them. They're blue sea dragons. And I'm like, can't stop looking at them. I'm in awe of these most beautiful, perfect little creatures. And that's a
Yeah.
moment of positive emotion. But I'm not bouncing up and down the beach going, oh, yeah, I'm so happy. It's just
Yeah.
like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Or when you get curious about something, I went to the Australian Museum the other day while I was in Sydney, and there's an autopsy of a T-Rex. I mean, obviously it's not a real T-Rex, but they've created an autopsy of, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So that curiosity of what
Yeah.
might it have been like. So again, we can create those wonderful moments of positive emotion without necessarily boiling it down to how do I be happy.
Yeah.
It could be a range of different things, and we
Yeah.
forget that sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Within one practice, you've incorporated 10 different tips, I feel. And yeah, it's just really helpful in equipping us with the knowledge and the tool because, I think the most important thing at the top of the list that I notice is we just need that reminder.
Yeah,
We all know
absolutely.
we all know what to do. We just have to do it. And like you said, the to-do list, I think that's so great. I'm definitely gonna try that. Yeah. No more to do, just ta-da. Right.
Sometimes we have to do the to-do as well.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But, like, we could turn the whole thing into ta-da because once you're done with the to-do, you can say, "Ta-da," "I've
Absolutely.
done it." Yeah, great. Alright, so now we're gonna, go into the research in depth,
Mhm.
and we're gonna talk about, emotional intelligence, the work that you do, and, really talk about it in the context of happiness now with, theories and research and
Yeah.
whatever else you can share with our listeners. And the first thing we always ask our guest on this show is what is your definition of happiness? And the reason we ask this question all the time is because each person has a very different definition. And I'm sure, Sue, you have your own definition too.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And even if you look at the researchers, they will define things differently. So for me, because I've spent my time really in the emotion space, to me, happy and happiness is an emotion. So when people talk about happiness in that larger scale, the way I think about it is human flourishing. So for me, it's can I flourish even through adversity? And this is sometimes what people forget. If we pursue the happiness, I've got to be happy all the time, sometimes we forget that we can flourish even when adversity hits. Like, it's really important to experience anxiety, anger, grief, and you can experience those and still flourish in your life. So for me, when I think about that broader definition, it's how am I flourishing? How am I showing up as the best version of me more frequently so that I've got the tools to handle when life hits me with something that's not so great?
Mm. Yeah, that is so true. And I feel like you touched on the point that uh, it's not about being happy all the time.
No.
Even though, it is a positive kind of emotion, and we all want more happiness in our lives. It's physically impossible. And also, I think that is one misconception that we hear a lot from other researchers as well. You cannot be happy all the time. But what about some other misconceptions when it comes to happiness? Because, like, we have all these things on social media all the time about, you have to be happy and joyful. And, like, that is the goal in life. And I just feel like we all need a little reminder that it's not the only thing in life.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
there's a couple of things that I think are, should we say, myths or misconceptions. One is that the more you pursue happiness, the less likely you are to be happy.
Mm.
So if we're consistently pursuing happiness, as in we're trying to chase it, trying to find it, we're ironically less likely to experience it. Whereas if we put tools and strategies and activities and habits in place, what we might find is kind of happiness comes to us.
Yeah.
It's a bit like trying to chase a butterfly through a field. The more you try and chase it, the more it's going to run away. But
Yeah.
if you lay down in the field, it might
Yeah.
come and sit on you.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit like that, and the research backs this up. That if we put too much value on the positive emotions and not enough value on the negative emotions, we're actually less likely to be happy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key things that I think is really important is let's not try and pursue it and chase it.
Yeah.
Let's put tools in our toolkits so it's more likely to occur.
Mm.
So I think that's the first one. The other thing around this is really thinking about the happiness. To your point, it can mean different things for different people. And again, if you take the wider view of sort of overall flourishing in life, you can have a day that you're not particularly happy about. So you can have a day that has lots of stress and pressure and negative emotions, challenges, etc. But you might get to the end of the day and feel that you've really made a difference today.
Mm.
And this is where we sort of make that distinction between subjective well-being, which is woohoo, am I happy, etc. Do I have nice things? Have I had a positive day? And then the psychological well-being, which is the more deep and meaningful aspect. So sometimes what happens is people are chasing the subjective well-being, and we get on that hedonic treadmill, if you like, of I need the next big thing, or I need my next ice cream, or I need my next beer, or I need the whatever. And we're
Yeah.
trying to chase happiness without valuing the negative emotions. We try and numb them through alcohol or through things or whatever you. And yet there's this deeper, richer side sometimes that is worth looking at around, are we using our strengths every day? Do we tap into a sense of meaning and purpose and direction? Are we trying to build our relationships? Are we growing as a person and giving back and looking at our basic psychological needs? So I think that's the other thing sometimes. And I think, unfortunately, particularly in Western society, a lot of our media promotes to us the happiness, woohoo, this will make you happy. Buy this new car and you will be sexy and gorgeous and amazing. It's a car. You know?
Yeah.
So I think we just need to be a little careful about what we're attaching our happiness to and connect back into perhaps, again, what makes you amazing? What are your strengths? What are your values? When do you feel you're at your best? When are you contributing?
Yeah.
Because when we feel we matter and we're needed, that gives us a huge sense of psychological well-being, so much more than did I buy a handbag or some new shoes at the weekend?
Mm. Wow. I had a similar conversation with a friend the other day, and I feel like that's exactly it. It's especially because we're living in the modern world. It can seem really materialistic sometimes, and especially when you have all these influencers around you, and like all these ads. Like this will like make you look better, or this will make you happier. Yeah, like you said, it's definitely not that. And I feel like when you talk about the butterfly, the analogy of chasing the butterfly, I just kind of reflect on it a bit, and I think this might sound funny, but maybe cats owners will understand because I have 4 cats. So I feel like it's just similar to when you're chasing your cats and you just give them too much attention. Similarly
Yep.
speaking, when it comes to happiness, right? Because you're saying the more you chase it, the more you feel like it's not there. Like it's just even harder to grasp. And I feel like it's similar to having cats because if you just try and get close to them and you try to pet them, you try to hug them, they will run away.
Yeah.
But if you just enjoy your life and do your things, they will come to you.
Yeah. That's a great example. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking when you talked about the context of, like, chasing
Yeah.
happiness, and I feel like it's so interesting that you kind of slipped in a bit of the materialistic world there as well, because I think a researcher who also came on the show a while ago mentioned the intrinsic happiness side of things, and I feel like that's it, exactly what you were saying, because we need to be careful if we attach all of our happiness and level of happiness to the things that we buy. It's just another dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Then it's not sustainable, and
Yeah.
that's not true happiness. So yeah, I think we all need that reminder nowadays, because like throughout the pandemic and all the things that have been happening in the world. Like I noticed that my neighbors and I have this kind of like a ritual where we go down, get our parcels, and we're like, "Wow, it feels like Christmas. It's so great." Like, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, so happy." But then what happens after that? It's just another parcel.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm
so
not
yeah,
suggesting we shouldn't do that. I mean, as I say, sometimes getting a gift or a present or getting
yeah,
something new is wonderful. If you want to exercise more, go and buy some new exercise gear and you want to
yeah,
wear it. So,
exactly.
so there are bonuses to that. And I'd never say to people, stop having a glass of wine and stop eating your ice cream or stop buying things. We need those sorts of things sometimes as well. We need to
Yeah.
balance. But I know for my birthday last year, I deliberately said to all of my friends, family, I don't want any gifts. I don't want anything like that. I don't need you to buy me anything. But what I'd love you to do on my behalf is to do a random act of kindness for me and then email me or put on social media or send me a letter or card or whatever with a story about what you've done. Um,
Wow.
and it was amazing. So I had well over 100 people
Yeah.
all around the world doing random acts of kindness, and I've collated them in a book now. And
Wow.
I did the same. So I did 53 random acts of kindness.
Yeah.
I did 3 for myself, which was a Pilates class, which I'd never done, a massage and a facial. So they were for me. These were the pleasure ones, the enjoyment. And
Yeah.
then I did 50 random acts of kindness for others.
Yeah.
So and again, random acts of kindness for people who think they know what this means. Be careful of the word random. People think it means spontaneous, as in, someone trips and you help them up type thing. Random means it's random to the other person, as in it's unexpected.
Mm.
So I literally planned my birthday for well over a year. I knew what I was going to do. I put my plan in place about 3 months before. I designed some well-being journals. I had them printed. I wrapped them. I wrote handwritten cards. And then on my birthday, I went and I snuck out and I left them on windscreens all around the area, or I popped them on cafe tables. I had the best day. By the time I was down to my last one, I did 50.
Yeah.
And I was down to my last one, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had 50 more, because I
Yeah.
really felt like my happiness went through the roof,
Yeah.
because I was like imagining these people's faces when they came across it, and when, whether they passed it on or whether they kept it. And I think, again, sometimes it's easy to assume on your birthday everybody buys you presents, and that's
Yeah.
nice. Half the presents you probably don't even want. Half the presents you wouldn't have bought yourself.
Yeah.
Half of them after 12 months are like, okay, that was great, but I'm moving on.
Yeah.
My birthday's already nearly a year and a half away, or a year away, and I've still got my book. I still think about it all the time. In 30 years' time, I'm still going to have all my reminders of these wonderful things. And
Yeah.
I know that what we did made a difference to people. So I think maybe again, it's just reminding ourselves that yes, we can have the glass of wine and we can have the new pair of shoes or whatever you,
Yeah.
um, but by itself, that's just chasing happiness. What are we doing to allow happiness to occur? Of how do we make a difference? How do we give back? How do we connect? How do we grow? Those sorts of things can be so much more beneficial.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's such a nice story. Yeah, I was thinking about that and I was like, wow, we should all do that on our birthdays, right? Because
It was the
they
best
bring
day.
happiness so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I loved it, Lou. I have to admit, I
Yeah.
literally didn't want my day to end, and I got down to my
Yeah.
last one, and I'm like, "Oh, no, I wish I had 50 more to play with."
Yeah.
Um,
That's amazing.
and again,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm necessarily the kindest person. It was just something that I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful. And again, I'm not suggesting everybody does that, but I am thinking about if we want to leverage our overall happiness and we want to use our emotions, look at what gives you a bigger hit to your emotions. And it's probably not just buying the next dopamine hit, to your point. It's actually doing something more than that. It's leveraging your strengths, being the best you can be, being a good friend, supporting somebody else, giving back in some way. It is
Yeah.
often more long lasting.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that will definitely reshape the way that a lot of people think about happiness. And today we're talking about emotional intelligence. So we have to go there. We are talking about happiness, we're talking about emotional intelligence. How would you think emotional intelligence affect happiness? I know we mentioned this briefly when we talked about the practice, but in the context of, all the different kinds of emotions, and our level of emotional intelligence, how would that then affect our level of happiness?
Yeah, great question. So if you think about emotional intelligence and overall happiness, they go hand in hand because if you, I use the pure model of emotional intelligence to help me. It's the simplest one, and it's the original one. So if you think about emotional intelligence, is about perceiving, using, understanding, and managing emotions. So if I think about those four things, and I think how it links to happiness, I notice, let's say, so perceiving emotions, I notice that I'm feeling about a bit flattened down. Okay. And I put a word to it that says, I'm bored, or I'm feeling lethargic, or I'm feeling lonely, or whatever it happens to be. So I put the word to it and I perceive how I feel.
Yep.
Then I go, well, okay, how is that emotion going to impact my thinking? Well, it's probably going to make me more critical, more negative, more looking for what's wrong, etc. Okay, do I understand where it's coming from? Yep, I've been sitting on my own. I'm feeling disconnected from people. I have not been reaching out to people, etc. Okay, managing emotions. What am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to pick up the phone, or I'm going to go for a walk and smile at somebody on the beach, or I'm going to whatever strategy.
Yep.
Now, if you think about those four abilities, they're known as abilities for a reason. They will, if you follow those through, they will help you increase your overall levels of happiness. Because
Mm.
again, if I stop and notice that on my birthday, I felt amazing. I felt like I'd done all these lovely things to boost other people's well-being with nobody noticing me, etc. So it wasn't about the recognition on the day, and I felt great. Okay, so I've perceived that I feel amazing. I feel energized. I feel like I've done something different, etc. Using emotions. Okay, well, how does it impact my thinking? Well, I'm more expansive. I'm more open. I'm more engaged. I'm more connected with people. Brilliant. Do I understand where it's come from? Yeah, I've just done a whole bunch of random acts of kindness. Feels great. Okay, managing emotions. Well, how about you do that again, Susan? Um, so what it's doing is it's giving me, whether it's a more negative emotion or a more positive emotion, if I
Yep.
follow those four abilities, overall it's going to increase my levels of happiness because I'm going to look at what do I do to do the positives and how do I get past the negatives more quickly. And overall what happens is my level of overall well-being increases. So that's all I think of it as, is it's tools, it's strategies, so that overall my emotional intelligence, my ability to self-regulate, all those sorts of things increases my overall flourishing in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we, again, do not get taught those things. But like you said, we use all the tools we have. And once we have that emotional intelligence understanding, we have the tools and everything we need to actually, make ourselves a bit happier. And it doesn't necessarily mean just for ourselves, but for, acts for other people as well. And I feel like another thing that is important, because when you said you kind of try to perceive, observe, understand, and then manage, if I remember that correctly. It's for when we observe things that happen within ourselves, but then also in situations with other people too, right? It's not just for ourselves. So when we're able to handle the emotions that arise out of others, because a lot of the time it kind of manifests in things they say or things they do, it's going to be really, really helpful. And that leads to one of the questions that our research team is really keen to kind of unpack is, it affects our personal life, as you said,
Mm.
because you can manage your level of happiness and emotions. um, and now I kind of think it also affects our relationship with other people as well. But would there be more than that? Because we've talked about our relationships with ourselves, with other people, through our emotional intelligence lens, but I feel like it's probably much more than that.
Yes, there's a few things there. So if you think about overall well-being, so we think about our overall happiness, we know from research, many, many, many research studies, that one of the number one contributors to high levels of well-being is human connection.
Mm.
Now, it's really important to understand when I say that it's not about having lots and lots of friends or 1,000 friends on Facebook or Instagram or
Yeah.
followers, that sort of thing. It could be that you have two or three connections that are really good for you. They support you. They will be there when things go wrong. And most importantly, they will be there to celebrate with you when things go well. So we know it's not about the volume, it's about the quality. Do we have a few people in our lives that we absolutely feel connected to? So if you think about that from an emotional intelligence perspective, if my emotional intelligence is higher, I am probably going to have better relationships because I'm not ruining them when somebody, let's imagine you and I are friends, but you don't reply to a text. And I go, oh God, what's wrong with her? Well, if I really understand from an emotional perspective, I might think that's not like her. She normally replies straight away. I wonder if she's okay. So
Mm.
I might check in with you. I might give you a
Yeah.
call. I might send you a little gift to say, "Are you okay?" or something different, something that sort of gives you a little bit of a boost.
Yeah.
If I am not particularly emotionally intelligent, I go, "Well, she didn't reply. She's clearly being rude. I'm not going to contact her until she contacts me." And then, of course, guess what? Our friendship is kind of diminishing. So it's little things. It's again going back to if you have somebody you live with, whether it's a partner or a loved one, whether it's a group of friends, at some point you will be stressed and overwhelmed, or they will be stressed and overwhelmed. So one of you is going to say something that annoys the other person. Again, to your point, if we have more emotional intelligence and we're aware of the emotional space we or the other person are in, we're less likely to be reactive. We're more likely to go, hang on, I'm not in the best space right now. How about I get myself together? Or, do you know what? I think Lou's having a bad day. Let me just be a bit more empathic, a bit more sensitive. She didn't really mean to bite my head off. Let me just check in with her. So, to your point, again, being aware of that emotional component can really help our relationships. And that's, let's face it, why we have emotions. It's about those interpersonal experiences. And then if I do that, my well-being probably increases because I've got some beautiful people around me who care about me and will forgive me when I'm a little bit off, because they love me and they will be there for me, and they'll know that maybe I'm generally a nice person and I didn't mean it. So I think they all sort of weave in. And if we remember that one of the number one contributors to high levels of well-being is human connection, it
Yeah.
reminds ourselves that even when you're having a bad day and you feel like declining your phone when it rings, you feel like not speaking to anybody, sometimes one of the best things you can do is actually reach out and help somebody else or ask for help yourself.
Yeah. I feel like when you mentioned that, it's just one of the things that we tend to forget, like a human connection, right? It's so important in our lives. And how do we get that connection? Like, we just have to cultivate our own emotional intelligence so that we can be better friends and better connections to other people, because it's never a one-sided relationship.
Mm.
You cannot expect to have a good relationship with someone when you just expect to get from them, and never really understanding where they're coming from, or being able to give them a little bit of help and support when they need. And I feel like that, like you said, everything is interrelated. Everything kind of weaves into your level of happiness.
Absolutely.
And we also know that in one of your talks, you mentioned that you need fuel.
Yeah.
to really think rationally and manage your emotions. And the fuel that we talked about earlier, and I think you mentioned that in the practice section as well, is positive emotions. Now we know that we need to cultivate our positive emotions, and I think it was really awesome when you said when we have the tools and when we know how to cultivate the positive emotions, you're able to manage, when the negative emotions come, you're able to, increase your level of happiness on the daily, which is really awesome. And then now we know that there are definitely benefits to positive emotions. What about the negative emotions? Because we deal with a lot of difficult situations from time to time because life has its ups and downs.
Mm.
So in the context of the fuel, in the context of the positive emotions, how can we get comfortable with the uncomfortable emotions as well? Because I feel like once we get the grasp of the positive and the negative emotions, we will be able to better cope, like you said earlier.
Yeah. So I'll give you a few examples of various things on this. So if we think about get comfortable with the uncomfortable emotions, when I did my keynote last week, I said to people in the audience, I said, okay, raise your hand if you've experienced grief over the last year. And probably at least a third of the audience put their hand up. So we know it's a normal experience. And I said to them, in all seriousness, I said, I hope you enjoyed your grief, as in learn to go, wow, this is actually really telling me. So again, remember the phrase, emotions are data, they're information, they're trying to tell you something. If you
Yep.
are grieving, it's because you've lost something of value, probably something of significant value, probably a person you love. Wonderful. Sit with that grief, enjoy it. Notice that you have lost somebody really important to you. So stop and enjoy it and think about all the things they meant to you. Funnily enough, the minute you start to do that, you're probably going to start to be grateful for them for everything that they've given you, and it will start to pull you out of that.
Yep.
So we know that sometimes the more we try and push a negative emotion away, the worse it gets. And there's actually a neuroscience reason behind this. They call it ironic mental processing, as in
Mm.
the more you try and stop yourself experiencing something or thinking about something or feeling something, the more your brain is going to remind you that you are. So if you're feeling angry and then you go, nope, I should be over this by now, I should be strong, I should be able to push through, come on, you'll actually find you'll probably get more angry, or it'll come back and keep biting you in the bottom. Whereas if you just sit and go, wow, I'm feeling really angry right now, let
Yep.
me just sit with this. It's not about biting someone's head off or punching someone. It's going, well, yeah, I do feel angry because this is important to me. So I think that's one thing, is, are we prepared to notice the emotion and go, wow, let me just enjoy this for a moment, let me sit with it. Then we think about the other side of things around how does this sort of I suppose build overall as far as that fuel perspective is concerned. So when I talk about fuel, I always bring in the neuroscience element. So when I use the word fuel, I'm talking about neurotransmitters and hormones. So when we experience negative emotions, we flood our body with adrenaline and cortisol, which is great. Adrenaline goes to our primary systems to heighten our awareness, to prepare us to fight, flight, freeze. And cortisol's job as the stress hormone is known to suppress our secondary systems. And again, if you're in a particularly life-threatening situation or a high-pressure situation, that can be really useful for you in the short term.
Yep.
But what we also know is when you're experiencing those negative emotions and flooding your body with adrenaline and cortisol, the dopamine levels in your brain are dropping. So think about this. Negative emotions cause dopamine levels to drop. Now, why should we care about dopamine? Because it's the number one fuel that your brain needs to work well. So if you're low on dopamine, your ability to self-regulate diminishes. Your ability to think clearly, make good decisions, pay attention, stay focused. So think about this for a moment. And anybody listening into this, think about the last time you found yourself highly distracted. You're trying to focus on something and then an email comes in and you're like, ooh, or something else happens. You're like, ooh, and your brain wanders off all over the place. Or you find you get that fuzzy brain where you just can't make a decision. You're in a restaurant and you're like, oh my God, there's too many things to choose from. Can you just narrow it down? That's usually when you're low on dopamine. So your brain literally can't think clearly. And again, dopamine is used up quite considerably when we self-regulate. So if we think about emotional intelligence or we think about our overall well-being, every time we have to self-regulate, we are using dopamine. So let's imagine you really fancy a bar of chocolate. And so you have a bar of chocolate. Oh, and then you really fancy another one because you need another sugar hit. And then you want another one. Every time you go, no, 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 not going to do it. Nope, nope. That's self-regulation. It takes a lot of dopamine. So self-regulation is when there's something that you know you should do, but you don't really feel like doing it and you make yourself. Or you know there's something you shouldn't really do, but you know it's good for you and you make yourself. So it's about how do we do those things. And when you're low
Yeah.
on dopamine, you can't do that. So you don't get your butt out of bed and exercise as you promised, or you have comfort food or snack all the time because you can't self-regulate, or we snap at somebody and bite their head off because we're not regulating our emotions. So I
Mhm.
think the fuel piece really comes into it of how do we regulate those basic things, that eat, sleep, and exercise, and how do we build our habits around positive emotion, which in turn then builds our overall well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like everything again is interrelated, like you said,
Yeah,
because one good thing leads to another, and when you know how to leverage the good emotions and where to actually do things that make we feel better, then it's all there. We have the tools. We just need to remember to use them.
yeah,
And I feel like it's definitely much more interesting nowadays because we're living in a really challenging time. So we have more challenging emotions than ever before, right? With what you mentioned before, we have the war going on in Ukraine. It affects everybody. So we might find that difficult emotions arise too, and having the tool to equip ourselves to then be able to manage when the difficult emotions arise would be, I think, the number one thing that we all need because like you said, when you incorporate the good habits and the good things in your daily lives, even though it's hard to do certain things like exercise, right?
yeah.
And so it's so important. It feels like something you should just prioritize, but it's so hard. But then once you're able to incorporate that into your daily lives, you're better equipped with levels of dopamine, hopefully, in our lives, and then we'll be able to manage the difficult and tough emotions, negative emotions when they arise.
Yeah, and to your point, I mentioned, when I saw the movie Belfast, as I say, there was flooding around the region, so lots of people lost their homes where we are. Then I went to see this movie Belfast that had all this, sort of underlying connotations about hatred based on your religion. And then, of course, I went to bed and I knew that the war was raging and and I just made me think, wow, so many people are going to bed now not knowing if a bomb's going to be dropped on them. And I went to bed feeling quite sad, feeling quite overwhelmed, and feeling quite guilty because I'd had a night out watching a movie. But again, these emotions are all really useful. Again, I
Yeah.
come back to the fact that they're data, they're information, they're trying to tell you something. Guilt can be a wonderful emotion because guilt often propels us to act. So if you
Yeah.
think about the word or the emotion of guilt, if I feel guilty, let's imagine I haven't rung my mother for 2 weeks and I feel guilty. Ironically, if I feel guilty, I'm more likely to go and pick up the phone. If I feel shame, that's when I internalize it and I am a bad daughter, I'm the worst daughter in the world, oh my God, I'm so terrible, etc. When I internalize it with shame, I'm
Yeah.
less likely to pick up the phone. So again, using our emotions wisely and going, well, okay, am I the worst daughter in the world? Am I a bad person? Well, no, but I do feel guilty because I haven't rung my mum. Brilliant. Feel the guilt and pick up the phone. And it's the same with me feeling guilty around, the fact that I'd had a nice night out while other people were struggling. Awesome. The next day, do something where you make a difference. And again, that was what I did is like, okay, well, how can I make a bigger difference today? To help people. Maybe it's not that I can't stop the war and I can't make the houses come back out of the water, but there are things I can do. So
Yeah.
again, it's about using those emotions wisely, if you like, and using the data that they're giving you. And as I
Yeah.
say, it's emotions are fabulous. They're such
Yeah.
useful tools.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is such a great reminder that to tell us that negative emotions, even though they come with the word negative, they're not the worst thing to
Mm,
happen to you ever. If you have the tools and you have the understanding that that's more data for you to, understand yourself and, situations around you better. And I
absolutely.
think one of the things that I think surface from research, and I might pronounce this wrong, so apologies if I do that, but managing emotion is one of the key ability in emotional intelligence, according to Salovey and Mayer. Hopefully, I
Yes.
pronounced that
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So to shift from negative emotions to positive emotions or just a calm state, which strategies can we use, and how can we really just avoid the negative outbursts? Because sometimes
I
it
agree.
hits you all at once and you have that outburst, and I think everyone could agree that we have all been through this before.
Yeah.
How do we manage our emotions more effectively, and definitely focus on that strategy side of thing? Because as you said, we have a lot of tools already, but
Yeah.
what would be some key strategies you would
And
recommend to everyone?
yeah, really good question. So I think the first point, and I'm going to pick up on what you said earlier about the difference between sort of positive and negative emotions. So often the word positive and negative emotions are used in the research, but we are never equating it to good and bad. So positive emotions such as feeling happy or calm or whatever you is an emotion. It's data, it's information. Same as anger or anxiety, they're data, they're information. It's only what I do with it that's classified as good or bad. So if I feel angry, that's just data, that's information. If I smash someone over the head with my laptop, that's bad, because that's the behavior. So I think that's really important. What you pointed out is they're classified in the research as positive or negative emotions, but they're never classified as good or bad.
Yeah.
So if we think about those moments, to your point, where you really know that you want to say or do something that's having that sort of strong reaction, and you know a negative emotion is about to burst out of your mouth and become bad potentially because you're
Yeah.
about to say or do something,
Yeah.
and there's a few things around that. And again, the way I simplify it is sort of body and brain.
Yeah.
So if I think about how emotions are generated or experienced, they're experienced through our body, through our physiology, and they're experienced through the neurotransmitters and our thoughts and things that go on in our brain. So if we go to our body for a moment, let's imagine I am sitting in a meeting and I am having a flash of anger and I really want to say something to somebody else, but I know I'm an 8 out of 10 on the anger scale. One of the things I would go to first is body. As in, your physiology, if you're angry, will probably be your elbows will be digging into the table, your fists will be clenched, your jaw will be tight, you'll be tense around your chest, your heart will be pounding, and you'll be ready to go.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is when you notice that is you drop your shoulders, breathe, and change your physiology.
Yeah.
Sit up straighter. Just allow some tension to release. Now, it doesn't have to take many seconds. That's our first step. The first step is physiology. So, body is the first. It's a really quick and easy one. Smile, breathe, keep your mouth shut. That's a useful one.
Yeah.
Then the second one is brain. What's going on in your head? So, if I don't know, let's imagine you and I are in the meeting, and prior to that meeting, I'd told you about a great new idea that I had. And in the meeting, you pitched it as your own. And so I am really angry with you right now.
Yep.
Now, if I launch at you in the meeting, that's probably going to make me look bad in front of the other people. It's probably going to destroy our relationship. It's probably not going to be a win win. So, in that meeting, I calm myself down. I try and keep centered so I can think more clearly. But if I then walk away from that meeting and I go, I can't believe she did that. She just nicked my idea. And I go round and round in my head about what such a bad person you are and how terrible you are. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I think of you. If I'm still an 8 out of 10 on the anger scale and I launch at you after the meeting in that mode, it's probably going to destroy our relationship. So again, if you think about, well, how do I avoid that reactive outburst? I make sure I take a breath. I keep my mouth shut. I walk away. I bring myself down a notch or two. And then I say, maybe when I'm a 3 out of 10 on the anger scale, I'd really like to have a conversation. And I let you know that I think what you did was inappropriate, but I let you know in a way that I can still think clearly, as opposed to it spewing out of my mouth and ruining the relationship. So that's kind of the way I often think about it, is what can you do to change your body, to change your physiology? What can you do to change what's going around in your thinking of, well, maybe she did it because she thought it was such a great idea and it was actually an honor and she wanted to share it. Maybe she's really struggling right now and she thought if she pitched an idea to the bosses, it would make her look good and feel better. So I flip things in my head. And the worst comes to worst, I say to people, if you are about to have an outburst and you know it's not appropriate, shut your mouth and walk away.
Mm.
Go to the loo for 5 minutes, take a
Yep.
few breaths, because often, to your point, it's happened before we kind of know it. And we're like, oh, I so wish I hadn't done that. And sometimes it's worth just going, okay, pause, keep my mouth shut, and figure out how I'm going to say it a little bit better. Even if it's 10 minutes down the track, an hour down the track, at least I can do it with a little more sense of intelligence as opposed to just emotional.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like when it comes to the outburst, it's so hard to control ourselves in the first place. But hopefully, after what you've shared, our listeners could implement the tools and the strategies that you've shared. I feel like they are really helpful because um, it's easy to just kind of go. I'm angry and I'm going to react right now.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's just take that 1 second and breathe. Physiology, or it's just not say anything to react to that situation and come back to it when you're calmer. And I feel like for a lot of us, this is something that we're still learning, no matter which stage of life we're in, how old we are. Of course, when we were younger, we can definitely remember situations where we didn't really react in a nice way. And like as adults, we're probably a bit better at it, but there are still a lot of stressful or sort
Yeah.
of challenging scenarios where this could come in really handy. So
Yeah.
I,
And
I
the
think, yeah,
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really useful is the more proactive you can be about
yeah,
keeping your brain fueled up, the
yeah.
less likely you are to have those reactive outbursts
Yeah.
because your dopamine levels are there that you can go, "Oh, I'm getting angry right now. This is
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
not gonna help me."
Yep.
Whereas if you've got no dopamine, it's like poof, and you've said or
Yeah.
done something you regret.
Yeah, yeah. It's kinda like prevention is better than cure, right?
Absolutely.
When you already, like, have that space and you have the energy and you kind of vibrating at a higher,
Yeah,
source of energy, you're just much better at
exactly.
handling these situations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so, we understand that your organization, I think Langley Group is what it's called? Yeah, provides the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. It's very long, but it's called MSCEIT
Yeah.
to assess emotional intelligence. So, could you please explain a bit more about this test and what the difference between this particular test with other kinds of emotional quotient
Yeah.
tests? Yeah,
Yeah, so there's lots of different emotional intelligence tests and tools and profiles and assessments you can do out there. The reason I like the Mesquite, which, as you say, Mayor Salivik Caruso
mesquite,
Emotional Intelligence, yeah, they shorten it to the Mesquite to make it easy for
mesquite.
us.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Um, is it's the reason I like it is because it's the only abilities based test. And if you think about what that means, most tests, profiles, assessments, they will ask you a question that you have to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 7, a Likert scale, for instance. So it'll say, how good are you at reading emotions in other people's faces? 1, you're terrible. 7, you're amazing, or somewhere in between. That's
Yep,
what most tests do. They're called self reports, or they'll have a 360 where I'll get asked the question, how good is Lou at reading emotions in other people? And I'll say, oh, she's fantastic, or oh, she's terrible. So that's how they usually work. The reason
yep.
I love the Mesquite is because it's the only test that's an abilities based. So it
Mm.
basically shows you a picture of a face and says, what's this person feeling? So you have
Ah,
to be able to do it.
yep.
And I really like that because it's not about whether I think I can or my opinion or your opinion of me or anything like that. It's basically, do I have the ability? And if you think about the power of that, if you ever want to do an IQ test, if you've ever done one before, an IQ test will never ask you, how intelligent do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 7? It just gives you intelligence or cognitive problems to wrangle with.
Yep.
Where the Mesquite gives you emotional and social problems to wrangle with. So
Mm.
that's one of the reasons that I love it. If you are using it for recruitment, why would you use anything else? You can't use someone's self report because they might think they're brilliant, but they might be terrible. But
Yeah.
you can use an abilities based test. We use the Mesquite as part of coaching, we use it as part of leadership development, etc. And because it's got the pure abilities that underpin everything we do as an individual, as a leader, as a parent, or whatever it's really useful for then looking how we develop it. But I think to your point is it's not necessarily about can we measure it? It's about do we even understand it? Are we trying to learn more? As I said, you'll get better at anything if you put time and effort into it. I'm just lucky that I've spent time and effort in this sort of space. So, what might you do to be able to perceive your emotions a little bit more or to put tools in your toolkit to build your resilience and your managing of emotions more effectively? So whether you take the test or whether you don't, if you can understand more about your strengths, more about your strategies that really work for you, and different things work for different people. You might find mindfulness works for you as a strategy. For me personally, I'm not a big mindfulness fan.
Mm,
I love my gratitude, I love my savoring, I love my journaling, those sorts of things. They work for me. Exercise works for me.
mm,
For other people, they will have other tools. So I think it's also about making sure that if you think about a whole smorgasbord of strategies out there, practicing the ones that you know are really working,
mm.
as opposed to thinking you have to your first question about role models around, do I have to be like somebody else? Oh, they say mindfulness works, I better practice that. Or they say this works, I better do that.
Yeah.
It's about treat yourself as a scientific experiment. Look for emotions, look for what's going on, practice tools and techniques that you know are building your overall happiness and helping you manage your emotions in a more effective way.
Yeah. Okay, great. Really love that idea because, recently I read Think Again by Adam Grant, and one of the ideas that he said in the book is you need to think like a scientist. So when you said, like, yeah, scientific, and it's definitely more realistic than self-assessment. I think that is a great way to remember what the Mesquite test is about. Mesquite, the test's already in there. Yeah. uh,
Very
yeah,
good.
yeah. Yeah, great. Well, so yeah, hopefully more people will try the test. I'm definitely interested in seeing what the test entails. I'm very intrigued. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, and for sharing all the insights about emotional intelligence, managing your difficult emotions, negative emotions, and also all the tools and strategies that you've shared with us today. I think I myself will definitely embed a lot of those in my daily activities. And I'm sure that our listeners will benefit from trying out at least one or two strategies, when they start listening to this. So the next part we want to do before we kind of wrap this up is we have a thing called open mic. And, we've talked a lot about happiness, emotional intelligence, but we know that you're definitely passionate about a lot of different things in life. So we want to be able to give you this chance to talk to our audience, anyone who's listening, about something that you're really passionate about, something that you really want to share with people that doesn't really have to do with emotional intelligence or happiness at all. Could be anything.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, everything I talk about is probably linked to how do I be the best version of me more
Mm.
frequently.
Yeah.
So if I think about the things that I'm most interested in, it's how do I, in whether it's me personally or the wider audience, the people I connect with, how do we put these tools into place that help us thrive and flourish? Because I know that when you are in your best mood, whatever that is for you, you are probably more productive. You're probably able to think more clearly. You're probably able to be more compassionate, more kind, more collaborative, more open. And for me personally, my goal is to change the conversation. It's to change the way that we sort of do things. But I'll do it through these sorts of things. So, if we think about the media at the moment, well, for the last 70 years, apparently it's got more and more negative. We have these hugely dramatic titles that come up of horrific crash. Or I remember just before Christmas, there was a title. My husband was watching the news, and it was something like um, some dramatic headline about the horror before Christmas because of the global supply chain, the devastation of kids are not going to get their Christmas presents. I'm like, oh my goodness, are we really using such language just because a child might be not get the Christmas present they want?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's about how do we challenge the way that we do things? How do we challenge what's perhaps going on in the world, whether it's to do with equality, whether it's to do with discrimination, whether it's to do with just generally being better people? I know that you will make better choices when you're in a positive emotional state. I know when your well-being is higher, you will lead people better. I know that you will be a better parent when you're in a positive emotional space because you will be able to deal with your child's outbursts. I know that you'll be a better friend where you're able to have compassion when you are in a better space. So for me, everything that I'm interested in, my number one strength is time optimizer. My number two is work ethic. It basically means I work all the time. And I love it. I am energized by it. I had a week, not last week, the week before, where I literally worked all day facilitating training. I worked 4 evenings until either 9:30 or 10:30, and I had 4 1 a.m. sessions for 90 minutes for clients. And I loved it. I got through to about 3:30 on Friday afternoon. I had an amazing week, and then it was a glass of wine and bang, I'm done. Um, but for me, it's about the thing that I am most passionate about is how do I help people be the best they can be? Because I think if we can do that, if we can all lift ourselves up a little bit more to be the best we can be more frequently, then we can change the politics, the equality or social injustices in the world that's happening. We can do something about it. Whereas when we're in our stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, sad, flat space, we're not thinking about other people. We're not open. We're not kind. We're not collaborative and those sorts of things. So I suppose that's my goal. And I appreciate that sounds like a lofty goal. But even if I start with me and how do I show up more frequently as the best that I can be, maybe if I can share the science with others along the way, maybe I can help them, be the best they can be a little more frequently. We don't have to be perfect all of the time, but how do we be the best we can be more frequently?
That's beautiful. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you so much for sharing. I feel like that is a really heartwarming message to everybody. And definitely we need to, stand up and definitely live up to who we are, be the best version of ourselves. And it's definitely not because a lot of people say this is kind of like cheesy message, but I think it's definitely not cheesy at all. I think like it's really important because a lot of the time, because of social pressures and things that happen in our life, we kind of feel like we need to shield certain parts of ourselves,
Yeah.
and then that in turns, I think in the context of this podcast, kind of affect our level of happiness. But from what you're sharing, it seems like you're showing up every day as the best version of yourself. You're enjoying your work so much that it doesn't really matter if you have a 1 a.m. session or like four 1 a.m.
Yeah.
sessions in a week. And that's just radiates a lot of positivity to our listeners, hopefully, because I definitely felt that. So thank you
And
for sharing.
Well, no, and I just want to pick up on what you said about, sometimes we sort of feel we have to hide ourselves. And we run a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. And the number of times that I see people on there, our students, our graduates, that I think, wow, you have no idea how amazing you are. Like I can see it. I can see these amazing people. And to your point, they're hiding themselves or they're holding back for some reason, or they're trying to be like somebody else. They read the celebrity papers or whoever the influencers are, and I've got to be like them. I've got to be skinnier, or I've got to wear this, or I've got to wear that, or I've got to do this. Or somebody who's more successful in their mind financially or career wise. And sometimes I see these people holding themselves back and thinking, have you got any idea of how beautiful, how amazing you are? And if we can just sort of let some of that be and be comfortable. And as I say, think about yourself when you're in your best mood. You are way more confident when you're in your best mood, which is building your sense of identity, your self-esteem, your self-image. When you're in your worst mood is when you doubt yourself. I can't do this. Oh my God, what if? Oh, people will see me this. So if you're in your best mood more frequently, you are much more likely to be naturally and authentically you and happy being you. And that then has a ripple effect. And the thing that I love, if I come back to the science, is there's some wonderful research by Christakis and Fowler, who did this amazing research on the equivalent of what I call the ripple effect. Basically, is if I increase my well-being, the ripple effect beyond me goes 3 degrees to people I don't even know,
Mm,
whose happiness will increase. Now,
yeah.
think about that. So if you show up as a better version of you, there will be a whole bunch of people that you will never meet whose happiness and well-being increases because of you. Now, that's a great responsibility to have.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, we should all know that and, do that more often. I feel like if everyone could do that, then we're just a much better society in general, right? Because,
Absolutely.
yeah, happier people do better things
Yeah.
and, contribute. So that's great. Wonderful. Love that message. You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, Please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.